bring in Jonathan Schanzer. He's the Vice President for Research at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Jonathan, how are you?
I'm well, Buck. How you doing?
I want to put up on our screen so viewers can see just what we would be talking about here in this convoy that was apparently targeted and hit by Israeli Air Force, because it gives a sense of, I think, where we're going to go here, which is that Lebanon is kind of a forgotten front in this conflict. You can see there, that is from the BUK system of surface-to-air missiles. Now, that's a SAM, surface-to-air missile. It's not a man-pad, which is a man-portable air defense system, which is something that can be shoulder-fired. This is specifically the kind of thing that would be used to bring down airplanes. This is specifically the kind of thing that's used as a very effective means of preventing an aerial campaign. Now, Jonathan, why would Hezbollah specifically, first of all, why would these missiles have possibly been transferred from Syria into Lebanon? And how would this change the calculation for regional security, specifically for Israel?
Well, first of all, I think, it's important to note that Syria, Iran, Hezbollah, they're all part of what they call the axis of resistance. Hamas was part of it at one point, but it's broken away. But Iran has cultivated this network of proxies, and Hezbollah is a key element to that. We've seen over the years that Syria has been providing a lot of weaponry, training, etc. Iran has done the same. Hezbollah is a tool of the Iranians, and the Israelis are at constant war with Hezbollah. The last real battle that took place was in 2006, but there have been incidents over the last several years, even the last several months, where things have been exploding inside Lebanon and in Syria, in Hezbollah-controlled territories. And so it's a constant challenge for the Israelis to
Jonathan,
get a sense of what they have.
In the specific case, though, of this kind of a weapon system, right, of this sort of Russian-made, rather advanced weapon system, the Israelis decided to act here, assuming, of course, that all the reports are true, because they saw this as a threat. Now, why would they see this as a threat? To me, it seems like they recognize that this would limit air superiority over Lebanon. There could be a problem with them flying reconnaissance flights, and in the event of, as you bring up, conflict. So it looks like we kind of ran up against a bit of a red line for the Israelis, which is the transfer of these kinds of munitions into Hezbollah's hands. Is that how you see it?
Absolutely. This is what we would call a game-changing weapon. What I was trying to describe was that the Israelis have been in a constant state of war with Hezbollah, and that includes incursions into Lebanese airspace. If that would mean taking down F-16 fighter jets, then that would be a debilitating blow to the Israelis and something that they can't abide by.
Jonathan, Amy Holmes here. It seems that in the past 18 months or so, Israel has been rather neutral, actually, when it comes to Syria, because they don't want to see Syria devolve into chaos and have all of these weapons unleashed all across the Middle East and their enemies and neighbors. So why would Syria do something so provocative as to arm Hezbollah in Lebanon and get those weapons near that border?
It's unclear. Certainly the Israelis have been trying to stay on the fence. They've made it fairly clear that they think that the downfall of Bashar al-Assad will be a good thing because it would probably weaken Iran in the long run. What's at play here is still very unclear to all of us what it was that they're trying to do for Hezbollah against the Israelis. All of this is still very murky.
I have a quick question about context. This is Emily. Why is Russia so concerned about other countries intervening in what's going on in Syria? I don't understand their incentive.
This is their only ally in the Middle East. This is sort of a
I'm sure
their only friend left.
Yeah,
I'm sure there's a good reason.
Well,
I just want to know what it is.
There's a year-round port in Tartus, which is a very important thing for the Russians, and they have a long-standing port. And they have a long-standing relationship with the regime. And, of course, the Russians still sort of harbor some imperialistic ambitions, I think. But
so let me ask Jonathan a question. So you mentioned we're seeing this alliance, these kind of proxies of, I guess we can include Russia as well, with Hezbollah, Iran, the Syrian administration, the Syrian government. But in your first answer to Buck, you mentioned briefly Hamas. And you talked about Hamas breaking away from that alliance. It seems to me that a beneficiary of this Israeli strike is the Sunni rebellion in Syria, and therefore Hamas. What is Hamas's view of this Israeli strike? What would be their position on this?
Well, I'm sure they condemn it, but at the same time, Hamas had to break away from Damascus. They couldn't stand by and allow the Syrian regime to slaughter tens of thousands of Syrians in the street, including Palestinians. So they sort of broke away from the axis, but of course, at the same time, we know that Iran continues to fund Hamas, or actually not fund, but actually provide weaponry, and we saw that in the conflict in November in Gaza. So basically, Hamas has tried to make itself somewhat neutral here, but of course, when they look at potential attacks against Israel, that's a net positive for them.
Buck, you and I have talked a lot about this, and we recently talked about the video that President Obama released over the weekend, a message to the Syrian people. who cannot hear it because they have no state media right now. But it becomes clearer and clearer as you describe how this region is spiraling out of control, that the time for us to have impacted and affected some change here would have been a year ago, and potentially this might be out of our hands. But I was reading Foreign Affairs recently, and there was a great interview with Turkey's President Abdullah Gül, and he was asked about Turkey's decision to down a plane last October suspected of carrying arms from Russia to Syria. And the president said the problem in Syria is not a bilateral issue between Turkey and Syria, meaning we don't have a beef with Syria. There's no conflict of interest or settling of accounts between Turkey and Syria. The problem in Syria is the grave human rights violations being committed by the regime against the people who have legitimate demands. This makes the matter something that relates to the whole international community. Now, I don't know why that couldn't have been our position all along. And in fact, it's the kind of rhetoric we heard from the president on the steps of the Holocaust Memorial, talking about the human rights violations and doing nothing about it.
Not to be flippant, but I think unfortunately the ship of the U.S. sort of leading the charge here has sailed. This is not actually going to happen.
No, but why
and when you see what the Israelis are doing, I think is a recognition here that as this thing collapses, thus far it's been somewhat contained with outside actors coming in. Right. If this thing collapses, you're going to see things start to go out. And Jonathan, earlier in the day, we had some back and forth, and you sent a list out to us of some of the things that would be looming threats, major concerns. Just want to put them up for folks at home to see. Advanced Manpad, or in this case SAM, surface-to-air missile transfer from Syria to Hezbollah. That may have already happened. But we look at some other things on that list, and Jonathan, do you think that all three of those things are distinct possibilities getting stronger every day?
Absolutely. I mean, the idea that the chemical weapons could fall into the hands of Hezbollah or Jabhat al-Nusra, that is absolutely a concern. We know that initially there were something like 50 different sites where there were chemical weapons. It's been reduced down to 15, but we also know that in some of the places where Hezbollah is actively trying to defend Syrian positions, or in places where Jabhat al-Nusra has become powerful, that there are chemical weapons facilities nearby. So that's a major, major concern. And then there's just the overall devolving of the situation there in Syria, which could potentially prompt the Israelis to come in as well.
All right, Jonathan, thanks very much for sharing your expertise. We appreciate it.